Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for participating, and I hope to share a lot of helpful information today that kind of gets you off on a good foot for your program. So let me share. Let's see. Oops, excuse me. So many screens. Okay, so sorry. So just as a reminder, I think Helene already said that we're recording this meeting, so you could always go back and listen to it again if you love the sound of my voice or you will need more information, but you can always email us as well. So the purpose of today's presentation is for me to go over all the resources that we've kind of cultivated for you all and then allow for questions. So going over the local evaluation plan and guidelines, a couple different logic models that we have. We had the one that sent out to you all for feedback, but we have some templates for you to use if you don't have your own for your program. The LEP rubric that we've created internally that'll help us kind of consistently evaluate all of your plans together. And we'll talk more about that later. Evaluation resources, and then a sample LEP for you to kind of glance over if you are interested in kind of the look of and the format of certain things. Again, you don't have to, it's not a requirement or anything to model it exactly after that. It's just sometimes I know when I was writing certain templates or forms and reports, it was kind of a good idea to look at things like that just to get a starting point. So please jump in at any time if you have any questions throughout this presentation. So let me move this. Oops. Oh, Lord. That's what happened.
I don't know about y'all, but
sorry.
No amount of glasses is going to help me on that.
Trying to move my little thing. Anyways. We'll just ignore that. So, okay. So the documents that I sent out on Monday are the ones I'm going to be covering. So if you want to bring those up next to you so you can see them better. And then again, like Helene said, those are available on our website as well. So the local evaluation plan and report guidelines are all in one, and it's 9 pages. We're going to go over that and then in each section. So this is just an introduction of what we kind of expect and why we're asking for these things. It's pretty common in all of our grants to ask for this. And this is something that you, after you've written your plan and then eventually your report, you're going to be able to use as a resource to demonstrate the success of your projects and perhaps get funding on, later again for an additional cycle, or maybe someone, the board of supervisors, would need support to say, hey, our program worked really well. We had a lot of strong impacts on local youth or cannabis grows, and we think we'd like to continue it. So we are asking you all to submit your local evaluation plan by Friday, February 26th, 2021 this year, which sounds so weird, but again, send it to that email box. If you have any questions before that, please let us know along the way. So let's see. Okay. So pretty standard, of course, the primary, so this is the primary document we're actually asking you to use as a resource for when you're creating your plan. Has everything you need to respond to. And of course, you can always add more. It also includes how to contact us and due dates, deliveries, deliverables, and definitions. Of course, we need a cover page, which is kind of self-explanatory with some details, and that helps in future for posting. We kind of keep track of different cohorts and things like that based off of the information that you're sharing with us. Project background, we'll go over, we'd like at a minimum for you all to share information essential to understanding the project and the need for the project, meaning the history in the community, an explanation of activities and or services, a description of similar efforts in the region, a description of how the activities and or services address the need. And I know you're thinking, well, we kind of already talked about that in the proposal. You did, but we would like to have you reiterate here, because just so we make sure that we understand what you all are covering. And we're mindful that the proposal you submitted was only, I think, 10 pages. So you probably limited the details that you would have liked to have shared at that point. So this document doesn't have a page limit, so you can cover as much, if not more, of what you described in your application. So we look forward to kind of getting the details in there. So project components that involve participants, and you'll notice as I go through that we try to delineate between recognizing there's lots of different types of projects here. There's ones that have required participants where like they're coming in from a program and we're providing immediate services to them. Then there's participants as in youth who perhaps are going out to their classroom and educating them. They're not necessarily required, and you're not tracking them long term. And then there are like retailer participants for education purposes. And then there's services, which is we kind of steered towards like the law enforcement angle of that because it's just so different. But this again encompasses all of those things because we're trying to anticipate how you're going to respond to us. So if you're one county and you're not doing anything like law enforcement related, say going out and doing environmental impacts and things like that, then recognize that maybe not all of these elements are something that you have the ability to respond to. But so for those project components that involve participants, we'd like you to define the target population, meaning gender, age, risk factors, prior involvement in the juvenile justice system, the criteria used to determine participant eligibility of that target population, and then describe the process for determining which interventions and/or services the participant needs and will receive. Please also provide a description of the goals and objectives identified in the project work plan of the proposal. So these will be the same or very close to what you put in your application. If those have changed or may have to, please reach out to discuss with Helene. If you're unsure, reach out either way, and that can be determined because you are awarded on the goals and objectives, amongst other things, that you said you were going to use and work on. So if something changes and you're not able to serve a certain type of population, Helene and you will have to, and I will be part of that, work through what kind of changes or modifications will be allowed. So. And like Helene said, please reach out at any time if you're not sure if you should be letting us, know, because it's only fair that if you're awarded a certain amount of money on the promise that you're working or doing something, and then you turn out that you are unable to, then we need to know. So a big part of the local evaluation plan, we ask you at a minimum in this section to include the research design for the process evaluation. For the project components that involve participants, please include the plan to document activities within the project or services provided to each participant, maintaining a database or sign-up sheets, and how the participants' progress will be tracked, start dates, attendance, dropout, successful completions, project progress milestones, etc. For those project components that do not involve participants, the plan we'd like you to describe is the plan to document activities. So that would be more code enforcement, investigation, system equipment updates, talking about how you're getting satellite imagery, things like that. How activities progress or how activity progress will be tracked. So again, start dates, cases initiated or resolved, inspections, eradications, and or remediations. Then process variables and how they will be defined and measured. So the tools or instruments used to collect the data and the frequency of collection. So if you're using surveys for the public or some of the youth in classrooms or elsewhere, or the way you're contacting vendors or distributors, we'd love to see like those tools that you're going to be used. So then we'd like to talk about how the process data will be collected using those tools and the actual data sources that you're using. This is super important because what we frequently have seen in the past is people say, we're going to use X amount of data and it's going to come from this place and then we're going to use it and it's going to be great. And we love to hear that, but it turns out in the long run, or when actually comes to like obtaining that data, there's a bunch of stumbling blocks in the way. So for example, we had one grantee for a separate grant. They said, well, we know someone who works at probation. We're going to get the probation data. we're going to tie it to our project, and then we're going to show that our project, helped reduce recidivism for probationers. Well, aside from the fact that you can't just obtain probation data legally, just willy-nilly through your friend, the person that they knew was working for their office also had worked for probation. Well, by the time the grant started and then their reports and plans were being written, that person didn't work for them anymore. So their plan was gone. So really want you to think about where you're getting it, how you're getting it, and not waiting till the last second to get it, because then you're trying to fill in gaps. So kind of in line with that, we'd like to know the project oversight structure and overall decision-making process for the project, and how the components will be monitored to determine effectiveness and adjust, and if they are needed to be adjusted as necessary. We don't expect everything to, exactly how things are going to be run perfectly. Initially, things need to change, and sometimes, especially with the state of COVID and other natural disasters that pop up, adjustments have to be made. So just let us know.
Ashley?
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I have a question that says, do you mean that you would like to see the data templates, or is it a narrative language appropriate, or do you want to see both?
If you have definitely the narrative, but if you have the templates, please feel free to include them as an attachment, because that would it'd be interesting to see. You don't have to put your Excel workbook on there or something like that. But if you have a survey form that says participant ID and these are the questions you're using, and you're trying to do a pre-post understanding of behavior change or something like that, that would be great to see.
Great, thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, and then again, a part of the process evaluation is we would like to know how the plan for documenting activities performed by staff and contracted providers, if applicable. Procedures ensuring that the project will be implemented to Fidelity when applicable, and then how quantitative and qualitative process data will be analyzed. So describe the statistical tools used to analyze quantitative data, so descriptive statistics, chi-square, et cetera, and the methods used for analyzing qualitative data, so identifying themes, content analysis, perhaps if you had a focus group. You don't need to state the analysis type for each evaluation activity separately. We just would like a general description overall of what you estimate the method in which you're going to evaluate your process evaluation with, and the data too. And again, sometimes in the long run, we realize, oh, this might not be the best method, but just try to estimate what you think will be the method that you think will work for you at the time. Best intentions going in, thinking maybe you're going to do pre-post testing and a comparison group, perhaps with some local youth, or collecting data based on how many plants you've eradicated. Sometimes you don't realize until it's too late, and we're hoping to avoid that maybe that process or method isn't feasible. Does anybody have any questions about the process evaluations?
Go ahead and open up your mics if you want to ask those questions right now. There's none in the chat currently.
Okay, so as a pairing, so of course we want to know the outcome, evaluation, and method, and what your program did and or it's planning on doing, and how successful it's going to be. So we'd like the research design for the outcome evaluation. Like I said, pre-post test, mixed methods, comparison groups. Comparison groups tend to be hard to do. We'd love to see them, but because they are really interesting and do show a lot of valuable data, but recognizing sometimes that's not feasible. We'd like to see a set of evaluation questions. These are the questions that the evaluation will answer. These shall include the goals and objectives from the original proposal, and may also include more outcome-oriented questions. So more questions can be added than what was reported originally in your application, because you may discover you are evaluating more something more or slightly differently. So we recognize that when you wrote the application, you may not have identified all of the questions you wanted to ask and answer through your outcome evaluation. So if you want to add those, feel free, so that they're more focused, then that's totally fine. We'd love to see that as well. So for project components that involve participants, we'd like to know the estimated number of participants expected to receive each type of intervention or service. The criteria for determining participant success in the project. Did they finish X amount of classes? They finished all their work. They participated in certain services, etc. The estimated number of activities expected to be accomplished. Again, this is an estimate, doing your best. Same with how many estimated number of participants you're going to expect to serve. And then also, this is the criteria for determining the activity completion or success in the project. Did you identify a certain number of land parcels, and then you eradicated a certain number, and then what you defined as your department's level of success in the project? Satellite imagery, for example. Outcome variables and how they will be defined and measured. So again, tools and instruments used to collect data and the frequency of collection. And then how the outcome data will be collected, the timing of data collection, data sources. So similar to the process, this is more like how you're determining the outcome of the actual programs that you've been implementing and services you've been implementing. What are the results of that, and how will you attribute those results? And how will qualitative and quantitative outcome data be analyzed? Similar to what I said before, we want you to describe the tools that you're using to analyze the quantitative data, as well as the methods for analyzing qualitative data. And you don't need to say each one for each goal and objective. You can say in general, this is what we're going to be doing at a higher level for the overall program and not specifically listed. And then we'd like to know the strategy for determining whether outcomes are due to the project and not some other factors unrelated to the project, including a description of a comparison group when applicable. So of course, in other projects, they said, one of the goals and objectives or goals was to reduce recidivism for the county by 10%. And then they put in place a program that helped with job creation or something like that. And so it's different than what you all are working on, but how would we know that the job creation program that you implemented or the after school program that you're doing with the youth is actually going to be able to be directly tied to recidivism level of a county as a whole? How do we know that it isn't attributed to some other actions or policies that have been implemented along the way and it's a slow change? So your job is to illustrate and show, no, this is why our program and the individual services that we're giving are being able to be attributed to the results that have been shown. And if multiple types of interventions will be employed, please include a description of how the separate effects on outcome variables of each type of intervention will be determined if possible. Okay, any questions?
There's none in the chat currently, Ashley. Anybody have any questions? You guys all awake? I don't see any hands raised, Ashley. So keep going.
So just again, I know it may or may not sound simple, but we really are trying to enforce the strategy of determining whether outcomes are attributed to your program. We do want to know if your project is the cause of the differences to your participants or your locations or service areas. As mentioned before, so we had a statewide logic model, and that was more for us internally, and then for you all to verify what projects as a whole with the grant money would be focusing on. Now, for this local evaluation plan, you're going to give your specific logic model that's speaks to your individual elements. So if you already have a template that your department or program uses. As long as it hits the points I'm about to cover, please use that. If not, we have some templates that you can use, and I'll show those to you shortly. So just as long as it hits and provides a visual representation of your project, which depicts the logical relationships between the goal statements, inputs or resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts of the project. So the inputs are various resources available to support the project, e.g. staff, materials, curricula, funding, equipment, including those aspects of the project where available and dedicated or used by the project or service to operate. Then we have the activities, which are what the project actually does with the inputs or the services provided in alignment with project goals. If you have access to input and resources, then they can be used to accomplish the project activity. So it's a ladder, it's leaning, they're all feeding to the next thing. So if the activities are accomplished, then the outputs or number of services delivered or products provided can be accomplished. Then we have outcomes, which are immediate, specific, and measurable changes due to the project. If the outputs are achieved, then the change we expect to see are the outcomes. So we can group them in short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. And typically long-term are kind of known as impacts in the ways in which the community, city, and or county are changed by the achieved outcomes. So this could include fundamental unintended or intended changes that occur in organizations, communities, or systems because of the project activities beyond the grant cycle. Impacts are societal, economic, civic, environmental focused, and may be the same or similar to long-term outcomes. And then at this point, if you have any appendices like we talked about, maybe some templates or surveys or materials that you think would help explain your program, please attach them. We'd love to see them. Again, they're not required, but if it helps us to understand how you're going to be providing services and evaluating those services, please do include them.
Okay, Ashley, can
Yes.
you just pause for a second? We have Audrey would like to ask a question.
Hi, thank you. So I'm with Alameda County, and I'm sure this is the case with other counties as well, but we have sort of a multifaceted intervention. We have providers in the North County, we have providers in the South County using similar concepts, but slightly different intervention processes. We have some more prevention-focused things, some more intervention-focused things. So different components are coming together as part of the overall project. And it's become a little bit of a challenge for us in preparing the logic model and the local evaluation plan as to sort of how to well articulate, different interventions have different goals and objectives. And wondered if you had some advice for us on the best way to present that sort of thing, especially when it comes to preparing the logic model. We almost felt like we were preparing 4 different logic models or 4 different evaluations. Do you have any recommendations for us?
Well, see, I imagine how I would approach it would be, and we're not saying you have to provide a logic model per type of service, but if you feel like it's clearer to create separate ones, or perhaps just like just breaking it up on one page so it's not so crazily complicated, then that's totally fine, because it probably will make interpreting it easier to Helene and I, and then being able to give feedback easier as well, which is, we always appreciate that. So I'm sure your inclination would be just to answer all these questions down the line, but if there's 4 separate services that are so different enough, then if you'd like to, because we don't have a set template for this other than please cover this information, if you'd like to break it up into batches, essentially, of like, this is the 4 sub-program descriptions, and then hit those points. And then if some of the, if the points are all the same, the way you're going to, analyze things at the end, then you'd have like a summary section of all of these 4 services that we're doing, although different, and we've explained the target populations, et cetera, but we're going to analyze it this way, and we're going to use the same resources, and recognizing that the goals and objectives may be tailored to each one or all of them, then document that as well. So just because we don't have a specific template, so I
Mhm.
sometimes that's harder, but sometimes it's easier because we don't want to narrow or like restrict you guys
Sure.
for what works.
So it sounds like we have some flexibility, but if say one of our components of the intervention is targeted more at say objective number 1, we don't have to force it. We don't have to shoehorn it into objective number 2. We can say, this one is contributing to this objective. These 2 are contributing to this objective. It's okay to do something like that.
Yes, I would be fine with that. I'm sure Helene can step in, but yeah, so you don't have to be like goal 1, objective 1, answer, and you have to force everything into that answer.
Sure.
You could say program 1 hits A, C, and E if you'd like. That I don't have a problem with that.
Okay,
Right.
great.
And we do, thanks for that question, Audrey. We do want this to be your document as well as, providing information for us, because it's going to be kind of your working document, your guide along the way. So as Ashley said, we didn't want to make it so prescriptive where you were going to have to try to put, square pegs in a round hole. As long as it is clear to a reader, whether or not it's Ashley or myself, or say these LEPs are public record. So if someone were to ask, you want to kind of keep that in mind too, that you're really kind of clearly defining your goals and objectives for each piece. And this grant is so unique, or at least to us, in that there really wasn't any restrictions on what you could do with these funds, as long as it would tie to the intent of the legalizing of cannabis. So, I'm sure that some of these projects are so convoluted with not only just the PPA1, which is the youth component, which Ashley and I are way more comfortable with working about goals, objectives, and outcomes with that. But now the whole other, public safety and environmental impact and the health component, that we're looking to you guys to, since you're the subject matter experts in your program, to be able to make sense of your programs in this lens of an evaluation. That help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll briefly cover the local evaluation report, only just to emphasize that, yes, it's due 3 years from now, but the stronger and more detailed you make your plan, the easier your lives are going to be in 3 years when you write your report. The foundation you're establishing right now of what we plan to do and how we're going to do it will make all things work out so much better, and at least in our experience and from what we've read from other grantees along the way, because in the end, 3 years from now, when you write your final report, you literally could, amongst of course, analyzing new data and putting in your results and saying how well you did, you're going to say, this is what we did. We can just change it to past tense. So the stronger you make your foundation now, and the more detailed and thorough foundation you set up for yourself, the better it is for a long term. We've seen very weak plans that didn't provide enough information, and we'll talk about later, doing technical review and assistance for you all. But it just, I imagine, made it so much more work and harder down the line when it's, time to saddle up and say, okay, this is what we did and this is how we did it. You're, reinventing the wheel and saying, well, what did we do 3 years ago? And, you never know who's going to be working on that. It could be a completely different person, and then they're starting from scratch to kind of reimagine and redocument what happened. So just think about it that way, that you're helping yourself now. You're kind of creating the backbone template, however, to ensure that things work out for you, for the best for you in the long run. So.
Right. And
So-
I'd also like to just briefly add, Ashley, is that we do have a larger evaluation component to this program with the Prop 64 funds. I tried to find out who was selected as the university that oversees this, and it's not providing me the information, even though it said that the RFP for those universities were back in October. So once I get that information, I'll let you guys know. I am assuming that it'll be a while before we actually get any requests or deliverables for that, but I can only assume that they're going to request of those state agencies that are allocating these funds to provide either a summary or an overview of all the projects. And these LEPs will go a long way for helping Ashley and I potentially put that together and see on a grander scale, what the administration is going to want in regards to where's all this money going and what are they doing with it, regardless of what state agency it's coming from. So just keep that in mind too, that we have a larger component that will be probably coming out sometime. Hopefully by June of this year, we'll have more information, but just keep that in mind too.
Thank you. So I just briefly will go over the report, and you'll see that it's basically a partnership with the plan that you're going to be submitting. So, and again, this is also the evidence you're going to use for us, and anyone else that you'd like to show how well your project went. So cover page, executive summary. So it has the high points of what happened, purpose, goals, and objectives, to the extent they were achieved, key findings, project accomplishments, and conclusion. Reiterating the project background, past tense, of course. Then we're going to talk about how you had your process evaluation, what you did, and how it worked. How many, for example, how many components or activities were conducted as part of the project, how you tracked them, how the progress looked, process variables, and how they were defined and measured. Project oversight and structure and how changes were made, potentially. Let's see, fidelity, monitoring fidelity and effectiveness, adjustments that were made along the way. That's pretty common to see, especially in the last couple, last year we saw a lot of we couldn't go to classrooms anymore because of that. So you all have the, lack of a better term, advantage going in of knowing, okay, well, COVID is part of our lives now. So we made we have the ability to adapt before we even start a project. So, but, again, you never know what happens. We've had ones where they went in and had 3 schools that were ready and willing to participate. And then due to budget cuts, one of the schools shut down. So they had to only focus on, middle school and 9th graders as opposed to like 5th through 9th graders or something like that. But of course, let Helene know along the way so that, we can kind of work things through and say, are you still hitting those target populations that you identified when you applied? So, of course, super important, the outcome evaluation and method of how you actually analyze the outcomes, the questions, again, that you asked and answered, what you actually accomplished through activities and how you define success, the methods of analyzing the qualitative and quantitative data, and then your strategies, and then again, multiple interventions if employed throughout, detail that. And then the big change, the big difference, of course, that you're not going to have in your plan, but you will have in your report is the evaluation results. And those actually describe what the description of the outcomes were. So the data related to the process evaluation, any changes that may have resulted, the total number of unduplicated participants, basic demographic data, what services were available and who received them by type, and then type or total number of activities or services. So, we did 150 inspections, or we went to a certain number of dispensaries, or we did a certain number of educational events to youth versus retailers versus distributors. And then we did, code enforcement, et cetera. It goes goes on and on. And then, of course, the degree to which the goals and objectives were achieved, and then the factors that affected the progress of project goals. So this may include factors which resulted in achieving goals more quickly or were impeded by your progress or impeded your progress. If there are factors that impeded your progress, talk about those. Like I mentioned before, maybe a school closed or staffing issues, etc. And then results of any process analysis, and provide a detailed explanation related to the project's performance over the course of the grant, results of any outcome analysis, analyses, and provide a detailed explanation of findings as it relates to any other additional outcome measures. And then discuss your results, the effectiveness of strategies implemented, useful recommendations for, and with specific guidance for what to do or replicate next time, or if you're able to continue the program. Your logic model, which may have evolved it's the exact same points we covered above. And then a grantee highlight, which is always interesting and helpful to read through. Maybe a specific student was helped, or land was cleaned up because of the remediations of the successful inspections you've done, etc. These are just, and then appendices of anything that you find valuable that would help. Could be the same appendices and attachments they used before as well too. So, okay, does anyone have any questions about that?
Actually, there's none in the chat. Feel free, again, to open up your mics and ask questions directly, because if you have them, others are probably asking, or if you feel like your question may be, too basic, please ask it now. Like I said, you guys are all also going to be learning from each other. I think I can't remember who said that listening in and trying to learn from each other. So if you have a question or a comment, there's lots of people on the line who are going to be taking this on themselves within their project. And so anything that you feel might be helpful along with the information Ashley's providing would be great.
Hi, sorry, this is Audrey Club again. I
Hey.
have lots of questions for you.
No worries.
No, thank you. Please.
Another question for us has been around fidelity measurements. The different programs that we're using, one of them does have some element of fidelity measurement to it because it's a prescribed curriculum, but some of the other interventions, particularly service referrals, that sort of thing, we don't necessarily have a standard to compare to. What are you looking for in terms of fidelity measurement?
Well, of course, like you said, if you have a program that's already been implemented, then you can start following that. But I would say just documenting this is the plan in which we're proceeding with, and we hope to administer services or do referrals, and then whether or not as a project manager or someone was kind of checking in to make sure intermittently that those steps were being followed by, say, service providers, or I'm drawing a blank on the term, but kind of day-to-day folks. So that's, we often come across that it's a lot of times people are using their own tailored programs, not necessarily, there is, of course, cognitive behavioral and motivational interviewing, and those have expectations with them, but a lot of times they're just tailored to Alameda, and that's totally fine because you find what works for you. So just documenting how you plan to actually do it, and then if, is there a manager that's following through and making sure that things are being met, and if not, what can you do to make sure it is?
Perfect. Exactly what I was asking. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll second that for Ashley. What we're going to be doing, not only in the plan, but as part of my responsibilities in looking at the programs, whether or not they're virtual monitorings or check-ins, whatever they are you being true to your procedures and your policies that you've set up for this program, as well as if you have an identified intervention that you can look and make sure that you're following that model to fidelity and you haven't strayed based on, one thing or another, like, oh, it was easier to do this, but then, you go down that path of that stray factor. So if you have something for your project and it's written down and people have that available to them, and as Ashley said, someone is checking in regular to make sure that that's being followed, not that it can't be adjusted if you find a more efficient or effective way of doing something, but that's what I would be looking for when you're talking about procedural or processes and how you're kind of administratively making sure that the activities are in alignment with your grant proposal or your grant program.
Yeah, and a lot of what I share personally is more like I've read ones recently, and then I read reports recently for different grants, and you kind of get the bad news stories of, well, it turns out all along the way, our direct service providers, the day-to-day people, weren't actually getting the participants to turn in their surveys and their data, but we didn't find out until 9 months later, or even at the very end when we're writing our report. And then we went back and said, hey, can you give us that data that we need to show that our program worked? And they just didn't collect it. And there was no, like, well, what can you do about it now? There was no, you had already paid them. You had already said, great, thank you. Oh, wait, we need something from you. And they're like, well, we're done. Sorry. So again, total horror story. Just want you to know, like, everyone's going to work together great, hopefully, but sometimes people drop the ball. And and that case, that grant wasn't checking in along the way to make sure that that service provider was doing what they needed to do. And unfortunately, in the end, the report suffered a lot from it. So, and yeah, so sorry, just reiterating, the plan is super important because it allows for your report to, be that much better. So my coworker kind of came up with an analogy where the plan is the recipe. So imagine someone coming in with no understanding or background of cooking, and they should be able to take that recipe and work through it. And they should be able to work through your program based on the information you provide. So I was telling Helene, I watched too much Great British Bake Off, and basically makes me think of the technical challenges where they purposely take out important information like the temperatures or certain ingredients. And then they let these poor people try to figure out whether or not they can bake a cake correctly without essential information. So please don't make us try to bake a cake without essential information, and don't make yourself try to bake a cake without sugar, because in the long run, it's going to be sad. So the croissant isn't going to turn out. So anyways, apologies. So
thanks for that, Ashley. Now I'm hungry.
Sorry. So moving on, I mentioned 2 logic models. So this is our first logic model. I'll make it a little bit bigger. So logic model template A. This is actually just a fillable template that for you to put your goals and objectives in. Again, they should be the same, if not slightly different or exactly the same than what you posed, and then let Helene know if they do change. So if you hover over each one of these, you'll see there's a definition of what inputs are and activities, etc. From what we've seen too, for some information over here, it kind of goes past the little box there. So if you click on it, the actual definition will expand, and you can see that right there. So all of this information right here in these comment boxes are what I covered in the plan and report guidelines. It's just helpful to have it in front of you right here. All of these are examples that we just put in to help key you in on what we expect. Again, Digitally, if you fill this out, it'll just run onto a second page or have a scroll bar on this first page. But if you print it out, just FYI, if you print it out, it will cut off. So that's just to let you know. If you do happen to use this, this is not, again, a requirement. It's if you don't have a template of your own. But if you do have a template of your own, as long as it hits all of these columns, then please use that, whatever you're more comfortable with. Let's see if you let's see. Oh, and of course, so you can just delete these two. So once you're ready to fill it out, you can just delete those and fill out your own information. I'll switch over to, so that's A. Logic model B is the same, except for, so sorry, logic model A has inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts generally. This version is the same in that, oops, sorry, as all the hovering boxes and goals that you'd like to talk about and outputs and things, but we've broken up the outcomes and impacts into short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, and long-term outcomes, which are kind of like the socioeconomic, civic impacts that I mentioned, long-term, years down the road. We don't have a preference, again, of whether or not to use these or use your own or of A or B. Again, it's just to help you as a resource. And then, like I said, just delete stuff and then you can use that as a fillable template. And if you have questions, please let me know. Sometimes I find short-term, medium-term, and long-term a little almost easier because it helps you think about what you're expecting from yourselves immediately versus long-term. More of like a to-do list in a way, but and this is of course separate than the statewide logic one, and that was more just for you and us to present and educate anyone who isn't familiar with the grant. So, oops, move this out of the way. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Hey, we've got, Summer, please.
So if you have, like, let's say we have the youth development side of our grant and the enforcement side of our grant, would we do two separate logic models for that? If it would make it more clear?
I would probably advise that. That's what we found when we created the statewide one. It was just got too messy. And what you'll probably find is that some of the inputs will be exactly the same, and then you could just drop those in. So yeah, if you'd like to model it after the statewide one where there's like the youth aspect and then there's the law enforcement aspect, totally fine with us, especially if it makes your life easier.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Summer. Anyone else? I don't have anything in the chat box, so feel free to unmic or raise your hand.
And sorry if any of this seems, quick or rudimentary or anything. We're just hoping to share as much as possible because we don't really know what level of resources everyone is using yet and what experience they all have. So we're just trying to get as much out there as possible. So briefly, Helene mentioned, and we mentioned in the grantee orientation, we have a thing called an LEP rubric. So I'll pull that up right here, and then I'll pull that up next to our guidelines. So the local evaluation plan scoring rubric is basically a tool that we as a research unit created to help us evaluate your plans consistently. So you'll see here there's points that you can be scored with based on each item below, but don't focus on the points. Those are more internal for our purposes. It allows us to evaluate all of the LAPs in a standardized way to determine which plans may need help to get prepared for a good evaluation. And it kind of helps to prioritize issues that need to be handled along the way. you'll see that the rubric here mirrors the content requested in the guidelines. So cover page, project background, process evaluation method and design, etc. So what I'll do is when you turn your LEP in, I will read through those and then I'll just use this as a standard rubric to kind of make sure that I'm not missing anything. And if you're missing something or if I'm confused about it, then I'm going to make some comments. And then for technical assistance purposes, if you need it, Helene and I will reach out and have like a conference call to say like, hey, you know, we were a little bit confused about how you're going to do a process evaluation, or actually you didn't talk about that at all. What are you thinking? How do you think this is going to come out? Like what steps or help do you need from us to ensure that all those points are being hit? Again, the score or the points aren't going to be used for anything money related or awarding or anything like that. It's totally for us as a tool. And this is actually only the second time we've used it. So we're testing it out and it may change later. It's just so that you know that we're evaluating things as consistently and as fairly as possible instead of just a checkbox of, oh, that seems fine, or, you know, like, oh, it's okay, like up to interpretation. So just trying to be a little bit more transparent too with you all so that you know that we're reading through these and the points that we'd like to get through, or sorry, the criteria we'd like to get through are all on here. And they're pretty much mirror everything, like I said, along the way. So outcome evaluation, logic model, and then these are the total scores that you could get. And those may change too, because like I said, it's a new tool, new program, new topic, basically we're covering. So don't focus on anything other than we are here to help you, and this will help us realize who needs help. So just letting you peek behind the curtain a little bit. Okay. Any questions about that? Summer?
So for people who are doing the evaluation themselves, would this basically be something we would want to make sure we hit all of these in our LEP and LER in order to help us evaluate ourselves, basically?
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like, this is how we would grade you, for lack of a better term, but yes, exactly. So then you could, after you've written it and you want to make sure that, you know, after reading your own work 100 times like I do, you realize, oh, oh yeah, I forgot to talk about this one thing. So yeah, you could use that as a tool to say, oh, you know, I forgot to talk about how the services will be implemented to this one population, but I talked about this other population kind of thing. So yes.
Okay.
Right. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, these scores aren't necessarily scores, but they're a way for us to guide kind of the level of where your plan is. And we want to be able to help you to have the best plan. Like Ashley said, if you have a great plan, it is so much easier at the end to have the report. And I have seen many projects at the end scramble, and you know, you spend all this time working on the activities of your grant. You really want to be able to showcase the successes and things that the methods that you used, so that you have a really good document that you can use, like I said, not only for BSCC funding, but other funding, and how well you run your programs based on your goals and objectives and how you're hitting them. So I know there's probably a lot of type A's out there. So, you know, wanting to get to that, you know, A+ exemplary score, but really it's just a guide for us because we want to be able to help you, and that gives us a guide.
And luckily there's 10 grantees now. So, you know, imagine if there was 40, then that's what the point would be, like we're triaging things, but that's a separate thing. But so it was more, it's just, you know, we're all about, you know, being standardized, and we can't preach something that we aren't practicing ourselves. So we'll jump over to, hopefully everybody can see the web page that I just posted. We're good. Okay,
It's
cool.
it's the main webpage.
So this is the main webpage. So bscc.ca.gov. And I'm going to show you how to navigate to our evaluation resources page. So you'll go over here to resources here and hover over it. Don't click on it, hover. That sounds silly, but you'll see down right here, evaluation resources page right here. So click on that. And our research unit spent a lot of time and effort putting these resources here because we think that they're super valuable to what you may need in the future or immediately. There's a lot of good information out there. So for program evaluation websites, this even talks about UC Davis, Western Michigan, the CDC, and Bureau of Justice Assistance. So these are simply just website links to those programs, which will lead you down even more resources. So it's a huge tool for anybody who may need some help. They have logic models, performance measures, valuation reporting, how to design and interpret evaluations and evidence, reporting results. So if you even just click on one and just kind of go down that rabbit hole of resources, it's super helpful. Let's see. So then program evaluation articles, these are all great for helping maybe if you decide to hire and work with an evaluator. There's a paper about that. And then, how to understand whether or not it's a good quality outcome evaluation report, juvenile justice program evaluations, strategies for evaluating small juvenile justice programs. So that might be one to take a peek at. Developing success stories and telling your story, and then logic models down here as well. So just, take a little bit of time and kind of jump through and look through these, and it looks a little intimidating. There's a lot here, but they are very helpful. And then if you need data, I know a lot of you had already found it for the purposes of your application, which was great. I think there's a lot of kids data references, and then like that child health survey off the top of my head. So if you're needing it for comparisons for local data or for your report along the end, there's like the census data, American Community Survey, Bureau of Justice Statistics, which goes down, and I believe they both go down to county level. Standard Department of Finance demographic data for California, our internal jail profile and juvenile detention profile survey, and then Office of Research, and then Open Justice, which is run through the Department of Justice, which has some great information about probation and referrals and disposition demographic data, and by gender as well, and age. Working with that data for a related project, but that may be of use to you when you're trying to illustrate the successes that you've had in relation to, your county to another or something of that nature. So again, just putting this out there for you to use at your disposal.
And Ashley, what I think I'm going to do is we have that cohort 1 page for the orientation information. I'm going to change that to technical assistance and webinars. And I'm going to actually have that link on that page too. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for everything. You don't have to try to remember to hover.
Yeah, the hover.
Because they're don't get me started on our website. Hopefully it'll be easier.
Thank you, Helene. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So then let's see, last thing. This was a useful local evaluation plan for a youth reinvestment grant that my teammate found to be super well written. So shout out unintentionally to Sonoma. different program, different lead agency. But again, this is not an expectation of this is how yours needs to look or how you directly respond to it. It's just we felt this one was pretty strong and it hit all the points we were looking for. So if you're interested, take a look. Talks about background, goals and outcomes. evaluation overview and their evaluation questions. And then we have some citations, design, and then they just broke everything down into the categories that they were working on. Theirs seems to fit a little bit easier into one table, unlike say Alameda maybe was, you'd have a couple different tables or however you'd like to present that kind of says goal one, objective one goes to different and vice versa. And then we have data sources, where we're getting them and what it actually means. The data is going to be requested, data collection, observations, analysis, qualitative and quantitative, how they're actually going to manage their project, et cetera, et cetera. And then they have an appendix. So they're using the cans. So they attach that in there for us to look over. Not necessarily for us to say something is good or bad, but just information. Then here's their logic model. That one's pretty detailed, and that's about it. Oh, and here's the timeline they included. So again, this isn't, copy this one exactly. If you create what works for you, as long as it hits the points that we're asking for, that's what we'd love to see. So I think that's about it. So thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, we're of course here to answer them now or in the future as you're starting to turn these in.
Thanks, Ashley. A lot of information. And I know for some of you who are at this point taking it on yourselves, it may be a lot of information to digest and maybe a little bit overwhelming if you're normally fiscal or, not really a research type person. Just reach out to us, like Ashley said. Also, I would advise, especially since everything is virtual these days, is reach out to either a college or a university that might be in your area, or even not necessarily close, given that you can get on Zoom so easily these days, and see if there is a mechanism to look for a grad student or an intern who is trying to get some hours in or trying to get some experience for their resume. If you can't necessarily, based on your budget, uh, move any money for a full-blown evaluator like RDA, then that might be an option for you, and certainly would provide some a different lens, more of an academic lens than a programmatic. And if you do have some savings just in your budget, just let me know if you want to reallocate some funds for either a full contract with evaluator or just as someone who is now I'm blanking on the word, but kind of an on-call as needed, if that works for you also. So just as Ashley and I keep saying, this is so important, especially to have your evaluator or someone helping with the evaluation at the very beginning of your program, because it makes all the difference when 3 years come up, and 2004 will be here before you know it. And I mean, it's been amazing that it's been over a year since we started this RFP process, and really you're already a quarter into the project, so it'll come and faster than you know it. So the sooner you can have assistance and get that LEP shored up so that everybody knows what you're collecting, who's responsible for what. And I think earlier Ashley had mentioned, the following up with any subcontractors that you have, if they're responsible for collecting some of that information for you, make sure that you don't wait till the end or even on an annual basis, that they're going to be able to provide exactly what you need them to provide in order to show whether or not there's some effectiveness in what they're doing for you. Since you're paying for their work basically by subcontracting, you have every right to follow up and ask for data on a regular basis from them. So That's all
And
I
so is
have.
your evaluator.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you and your evaluator are working as a team and you're working as a subcontractor, we've also had that where the evaluator wasn't allowed to, or they were being blocked, for lack of a better term, from getting what they needed. So make sure you guys are in the same, you're on the same team, you're helping each other out and saying like, no, they're allowed to, go participate and watch services being delivered, to the extent that that's possible. And that you're sharing resources and allowing that evaluator or whoever, Office of Education to be part of this along the way, and because they're there to help you as well.
Right. Those data sharing MOUs can be very, very helpful when it comes down to that also. I don't have anything more in the chat. Is there anybody that wants to ask any questions? Not sure if some of those looks on your faces are, oh my gosh, what did we get into? Or waiting for someone else to ask a question, but by all means, open up your mics and ask away. This won't be your only opportunity, but at least everybody will be here in support. So with that, we have a thank you from the field that this was really helpful. Hopefully that's what we do, is be helpful.
Does Wednesday afternoons work for folks if we were to schedule that for our QPR webinar that we're hoping to have like early to mid-February?
Looks like there's some yeses. So yeah, we were looking at a Wednesday at 1 o'clock, either the 3rd or the 10th, probably shooting for the 10th. That gives you guys a little bit more time to review the QPR template, gives you a little bit more time if you want to actually have comments about it. We received very little. We did get some, but remember, this is going to be your document that you're going to be responsible for submitting data on a quarterly basis. And so this is why we wanted to put quarters 1 and 2 together so that we could have your input. Again, I can't stress enough how much we are going to rely on you as the subject matter experts in your programs. Like I said, program service stuff we have dialed in, but the other components and the other PPAs, we really need to make sure we're using the right terminology, the right language, and so that webinar will be really important for feedback and stuff if we can get that beforehand time. And so we've had a couple people ask if we can do it earlier on the Wednesday, and I don't see why we couldn't necessarily. We were just thinking that maybe right after lunch was easier for everybody, but we'll take a look at the calendars and try to come up with a time that will work as best as possible for everybody. But again, we will have it recorded and we will have it posted on the Cohort 1 webpage for everybody. Okay. Last chance. Questions? Concerns? No? Anybody got a good joke to end this off with? I have one. It's a dad joke. So there you go. How do you know that a joke is actually a dad joke? When it becomes apparent. Ah! You're more than welcome to use that. I didn't make it up, but I thought it was very clever. It's one of those little smart ones that you have to go, it's apparent. It's apparent.
Oh, man.
Bing. Yeah, thank you. I know you guys, except for Laura, you guys are all muted, but I'm gonna figure that you're laughing so hard you couldn't unmute to tell me what.
Laughing on the inside.
Thank you. That's the bad part about these Zoom things, is that I wanted to say early on, and I don't know if Ashley, it was a pun intended, but she said that we had cultivated all this for you, and I was dying.
No.
So, so it's stuff like that that is just, it's hard when you're not in a room with people because they're muted and you can't see their expressions if their camera's off. So thank you for humoring me by providing you with that little bit of humor. And we will let everybody go and just, again, reach out to us and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks.
All right,
Thanks
everybody.
to both of you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.